Hello everyone, I'm Miranda McLaren and welcome to our webinar today on Stop Blaming the Project Team. At any given time in almost every organisation that we work with, there will be a project of some sort of fashion running within that organisation. Whether it's a structured program of work or a small standalone project, these projects are fundamentally building new capability into that organisation to ensure their success. They create competitive advantage, exceptional customer experiences, and ultimately they're about enhancing the bottom line profit. Running these projects successfully then is critically important. If there is anything that the last 2 years have taught us is that businesses need to be nimble, that we need to be positioned to respond quickly, to take advantage of new opportunities. Project capability, that is good project capability, is key to this. At Nimble, we have examined hundreds of organisations and looked at the core capabilities that enable them to respond and act nimbly. I see these fall into 5 key foundations. The first is awareness. How conscious is your organisation to the marketplace that it operates within? Understanding its competitive pressures and the opportunities that those markets might provide. The second is engagement. How well is your organisation interacting with its entire ecosystem, not just your customers and your employees, but your supply chains, your partners, and even today, your competitors. The third is agility. How quickly is your organisation able to respond, and in that respond successfully? And are you limited as an organisation by any previous decisions that may have been made? The fourth is governance, and that's about getting the balance right between remaining nimble, but allowing for the due process and due diligence to occur in that decision making. And the last is implementation. How well do you actually implement this new capability? And does it actually stick within your organisation? We believe that these 5 foundations are essential to great project capability. Your presenters today are Peter Grant and Keith Ross-Carroll. Peter has been involved in tens of projects of over $100 million. He was responsible for setting up the project rescue practice at Gartner, and now regularly he gets invited by large banks, retailers and governments to come in and examine their failing projects. Keith has been involved in business transformation for over 30 years. Highlights include being responsible for the digitisation of Nine Network and more recently establishing successful digital practices for Hitachi in Asia Pacific. In the next 60 minutes, Peter and Keith will take us through the issues that they see contribute to project failure, but through the lens of these 5 core business foundations. So just some housekeeping before we start. We are going to cover a lot of content in the next 60 minutes. So please know that we will be sending a recording and a copy of these slides to you post the session today. And secondly, questions. We love them. So please ask them in the chat box below. We'll have a couple of points during the presentation where we'll be able to answer them. And if we don't get to yours, we'll follow up with all of you after today's session. So with that, I will hand over to you, Keith.
Good morning, everybody. It's Keith Ross-Carroll here. So let's dive straight in. We are jam-packed today, so we best move. So number one that we want to address is overconfidence. Overconfidence in the project context can occur for a number of reasons. Previously successful project experiences, project perceived to be a low risk. The sponsor has done it before, but maybe not in your organisation. Even if the project looks easy, experienced organisations and PMs never underestimate a project. In fact, if anything, they have a natural cynicism, which is very healthy, especially in the early stages. So if we look at some of the issues associated with overconfidence, look, when wrong assumptions are made, poor estimations provided, or inadequate risk management, especially impact assessment, is not well weighted. It's likely to end badly. And these are absolute traps for young, and from what I've seen, not so young players. An example of this is failing to undertake a risk management and assessment, setting quality baselines and not harnessing internal capability cost a major TV network the winning position and over $10 million of revenue as a result of replacing an industry-wide ratings measurement system where they could have consulted some very able people. I mean, in this context, Peter, I mean, what do you recommend?
We've got some recommendations for you. I must say that of all of the project rescues I've been involved in, 100% of them, people come back and they say, we never thought that project would be that difficult. They were all overconfident. So my key recommendations around this are culture. Just people will tend to be overconfident. It's a human weakness, but just don't accept it in your organisation. Make sure that everyone is aware that being overconfident is probably the number one risk at the start of your project. And you know what? When new team members come along, they're going to want to feel like they're going to want to express that they're knowledgeable and they're comfortable with doing things. Don't let them be overconfident either. If we have a look at the responsibilities here, this isn't the responsibility of the project team. This is an organisational cultural issue. We're going to take on projects and we're going to be serious about it, and we're not going to underestimate them at the beginning. Related to overconfidence is a concept I call clarity of vision. It is amazing how many projects fail because nobody's ever bothered to tell all of the stakeholders and vendors and the project team what the project's trying to achieve. You're going to be sitting there thinking that can't be right. But this happens all the time. I'm involved in recovering projects, and 100% of them are like this as well. If you go and ask everybody in the project team, what are you trying to achieve, you'll get 20 or 30 different answers. I've been told before, and it's great advice, if you haven't told people 50 times what you're trying to achieve, then you're failing in your job as a communicator and an executive. So what are the issues here? So imagine into the technical space. People come to work every day and they're all trying to do a good job. And every day they've got to make lots and lots of little micro decisions. If they think they're heading one way and the project really needed to go another way, most of those decisions aren't going to be right. And there's a couple of litmus tests for when we don't have clarity of vision. I'm just going to talk about one of them. We've nominated a few things here, but the one that I love the most is that no one can name the project properly. So I'll give you an example. I was called in to help recover a project in the federal government. It had been running for 7 years, and had hardly delivered a thing. The project's name was IT Redev, standing for IT Redevelopment. The project wasn't about redeveloping IT. It was a government department whose job it was to look after kids who were in trouble. The project was about children, not about technology. So I left it with the project team and the CEO. I'll come back in a month, think up a new name. And they did a surprising job. A month later, I came back and I was given a cup and it had the name of the project on it. I was given a lapel pin, it had the name of the project on it. And I looked at the name of the project, and the project was Cuba. I didn't really know what to say because I thought, how is this helping? How is the name Cuba helping me tell everyone this is a project about kids? Well, they'd run a competition in the organisation and everyone voted for it, and this one won because Cuba was the Roman goddess of children. Everyone knew what the project was for. This project meandered for 7 years. With focus and agreement on what it was for, everyone got it finished in 9 months. There were a few other things done to improve it, but this, I think, was crucial. Keith, what about you? What have you seen in this space?
Oh, look, quite similar, Peter. And it never underestimate the merch aspect of it. That's for absolute certain. But I think as a wrap up, yeah, look, understand your project objectives, so key, and socialize them many times. And look, one thing that it's been a trap for me at least is testing to make sure that communication's been received, because sometimes the message doesn't get through. Clearly, the team name should reflect the actual effort and not something bland like, as you say, Redev. We had one called Next Gen, would you believe, which didn't really resonate. But yeah, most certainly, Peter, taking all those points, it makes a big difference. Probably worthwhile just looking down the bottom left and the bottom right here. What we're doing is just keeping a track of what we'd call the RACI, or the responsible, accountable parties, consulted and informed. And what we see, time and time again here, is that it is business related, non-project folk are regularly responsible and accountable. and at best, the project team is consulted or informed. But if we look at our running total so far, no, really it's been with the organisation, not so much with the project team. And with that, let's go on to our next topic, which is weak business case options. So, look, in terms of making evaluation, it'd be crazy if you wouldn't. It used to be, you never get fired for buying IBM. SAP was the answer. All those usual answers. But the reality is now the digital world's changing rapidly. Hundreds of thousands of SaaS solutions out there and growing daily, and they're on the mark. So not evaluating these options is just simply dangerous. What if your competitors have jumped on the next and apt best thing? Market leaders are challenging often, and it's only a matter of time where there's going to be the right application out there that can be easily consumed. Now, of course, a large part of the technology game is looking ahead well before making such evaluations. And what you should be thinking about is how do you leverage your teams of experts and take their recommendation as strongly and as often as possible. But with that, let's have a look at some of the issues. So, evaluating options without having your business outcomes quite clear, or with poor requirements, alignment is just can be disastrous. Misalignment with your technical strategy results in blowouts and integration, skills building challenges, and it can create white elephants down the track. Misalignments within your ecosystem affects downstream customers, partners, and upstream providers. Failing to understand why and why not leads to poor evaluation, and it needs to be detailed in your business case. Delegating to transient project teams, with a thinking of I want it done, when the organisation is ultimately responsible and needs a viable long-term quality outcome, when you think about it, is kind of crazy. And an unfortunate example here is a government organisation that chose a solid technology solution, but it was a poor fit. And it resulted in years of incremental time and costs, rescoping, unfactored complex implementation costs as well. All could have been achieved with a commercial off-the-shelf financial solution. I mean, what's your thoughts, Peter?
Yes, I just see this all the time, and more often than not, the options analysis in the business case is a tick the box exercise to say, hey, we've done that. What we need here is to get this absolutely right up front, because it's going to impact every part of your project, the deliverables, the time, the cost, and I'm going to talk about it later, but the implementation strategy, which is an absolute killer. It's got to be done in the business case, and it's got to be done properly. I'm going to argue that if you've got a good in-house architecture team, they're the ones who are best placed to do this work. And here's why. Because first of all, they have expertise in design. So this is what they've been hired to do. They also have a great knowledge of your overall IT portfolio, what you've got in place now. So because anything new has to actually work with it. And if they're doing their job right, they should understand the market as well and the organisation's business priorities. So who's better placed with all of that background to work this out? That's not what we see happen. Quite a lot of organisations outsource to consulting firms to do the options analysis, and believe me, they just go tick the box to do it. And it's got to be done before there's even a project team in place. The next major mistake is saying, oh, well, I didn't do the options analysis properly in the business case, so I know. I'll get the project team to do it. They can't do it, they're biased. So here we go. Here's yet another issue where the organisation is responsible for doing this job properly. They should be handing over to the project team clarity in terms of what option they're going to take forward. So many of these things are not the fault of the project team, and we'll just keep on reiterating that as we go. Here's the next one. Everyone's had this. Everyone has had this happen to them. The sponsor really didn't know what they wanted. This is, believe me, inevitable. In every project, a sponsor is not going to know what they want at the beginning. They're going to ask for something, but it won't be quite right, and they'll want to make changes as they go along. Where we get into trouble is not the fact that they're making changes. That's going to happen. We get into trouble because we don't have a process for dealing with this, and it's a predictable problem. So let me have a look and see where this really falls over in our model. The first is in the awareness section, where sponsors come up with a great idea and they're really, really confident that they know everything about it. You can just bet they don't. So we need them to understand that, once again, overconfidence is going to be a big issue. They'll overpromise and you won't be able to keep a lot of those promises because they'll change direction. And if you commit into your ecosystem in a way that you've got a big sunk cost and a lot of promises going on, it's going to be hard to change. But by far, the most significant issue that organisations will have is in governance, because we need a way of independently assessing whether a change is doable. If someone says, I'd like my headings on this screen to be blue, pretty sure we can make that change, and I'm pretty sure it won't be on the critical path. But if they come along and say, we'd like to make major changes to how this whole system works, even though we're halfway through the project, that needs a lot of assessment, and maybe we can't do it. I want to give you an example here that's a physical example, not an IT example. This is actually presented in a YouTube video, and I've played this for some of my clients so that they can understand what they're asking for in an IT sense. So the Sampong department store collapse happened in 1995 in South Korea. 500 people killed, about 1,000 people injured. So how did a department store collapse? Well, when the building began, the plan said it was going to be a 4-story accommodation building. So accommodation, if you think about it, has lots and lots of internal walls. It's quite a strong structure. It was 4 floors high. After the construction had started, well after, the sponsor decided that they didn't want accommodation anymore. They actually wanted it to be a shopping centre. And, most shopping centres don't have too many internal walls, so they were all removed. And they got a bit greedy as well and decided it'd be a top idea to add a floor to the top. So not 4 floors, but 5. So sitting on foundations that were assuming 4 floors, sitting on foundations that were assuming lots of internal walls, this 5-floor building was opened. And tragically, it collapsed. There's an analogy here to major initiatives where the sponsor comes along and says, I know you've been going for a year, but that's not quite what I wanted, and I'd like to do something completely different. You can't make that step unless you get independent advice. These people should have done it as well, from architects to tell you what to do. What do you think, Keith?
Oh, Peter, I think that picture paints 1,000 words. It certainly one-ups the train wreck analogy, that's for sure. Yeah, look, I think if you to summarize it, and you've already said a lot of this, Peter, but just to wrap it, I mean, ensuring that the sponsors are fully briefed and coached not to overpromise and be certain of what can be achieved is just so key. I think the other thing is independent change control. And of course, expert advice should be consulted. And of course, stakeholders need to be brought into the mix to make, especially some of these big decisions. Anyway, with that, let's go on to number 5, common infrastructure left to the project team. It's not unusual to have dependency. We'll call them IT projects, and there's a bit of a sensitivity around that because it was drilled into us for years that there's no such thing as an IT project. There's only business initiatives, but here are dependencies that must take place, and these will be ones that introduce new technology platforms as part of the initiative. And these might be middleware, identity management, analytics platforms, collaboration solutions. They're all good examples. But a major issue is created if these platforms are left to the project team. In fact, you would say by default, if it's discovered by the project team, it's by definition already too late and it's going to be over budget. Okay, these essential business assets can be shoehorned into an organization in these circumstances when really they should be their own project. So with that, let's have a look at some of the issues. And before we even get into the issues, and talk about, say, who chooses these and who pays. What a missed opportunity to introduce a company-wide asset that may have significant competitive advantage. The problems associated with this: duplicating existing assets, not aligned to your enterprise architecture, compromises your roadmap, or simply the project team that are implementing this do not have the capability to implement it. And all these can lead to disaster, right? When we look at them, the other issues are, outside the technical, is how are they financed? Is the project expected to pay for the organizational platform? If they do pay, does the project therefore get to choose? Kind of seems to be the yin and the yang of it. And of course, the main issue here is that your governance may not handle all these scenarios. Now, here's an example whereby a federal education department separately commissioned multiple CRMs for different stakeholder groups. I mean, some of them crossed over. So not only did they duplicate efforts, increase costs, and fracture their enterprise architecture, but it also resulted in duplication of records, poor response to customers, and most tragically, miscommunication to a very, very wide stakeholder group, looking at touching 10 plus million Australians. All of this could be easily avoided with recognizing it as a common infrastructure and implementing it as in the same way. So, Peter, how do we address and avoid this?
This one really is right after my own heart. I think one of the things that I find with most organisations is that their strategic planning process is completely inadequate, because we should be able to identify the need for common infrastructure in the strategic planning process. I'm thinking of having a system to go out to deal with all of my customers, and they can all log in online. Well, if I don't have a way of implementing identity management for that, they're not going to be able to do it. So surely there's an example where I knew about it up front, that I needed to have some common infrastructure put in place. We know about it early, we can do a really good job of putting it in. The other situation here is we've got to make sure that it's owned by the correct part of the organisation. Not just the first people who need it, but the right part of the organisation. The Queensland Government's a bit of a case study here. Identity management in the Queensland Government for the community is really held by Queensland Transport because they do driver's licences. But how does that work for every other department? And how does that work for Queensland Health? So if I have a look in New South Wales, they have centralised the ownership of identity into a services department that everyone uses. That's a big advantage they have over Queensland. If the other thing is, we need to make sure that it obviously goes through a decent business case process, and it's selected by experts. Boy, I can't emphasise this too much. Common infrastructure, when you put it in, you're going to have it for 10 years plus. It better be a good call that you make. I wouldn't be leaving it to a project that I hired initially to just put in a business application. And I need to make sure that it's adequately funded. I'm going to say that the CFO has a role in this, because it's quite easy and a lot cheaper to put something in that I'm only going to use once. But if I want to maximise reuse, that always costs more. So, and maybe it's a good idea to just go back and review where we have common infrastructure, because we may have got some of these things wrong, and if it's not too embedded, it might be time to fix it. This is not a project responsibility. I can't emphasise that too much. This is an architecture team and CFO and organisational leadership responsibility. In government, this is probably not even an agency responsibility. This is potentially in the Premier's department to get this right. So no, once again, not the project team. So we're nearly halfway through, so I thought we might hand over to Miranda and see if there's any questions we need to answer.
Miranda will just unmute herself. So no questions have come up as yet, but there's been some interesting dialogue that's been generated by some of the things that you said, Peter. One of the things maybe just to talk on is that one of the participants has talked about the sponsor changing their mind. It's a predictable challenge. Like, if, as you mentioned, we've all been in projects where this has happened. How do you plan for that? What are some tips, knowing that that's going to happen, that you might have?
Absolutely. So I think there's some quite simple things that we should always do, because we just know it's going to happen. So the first thing we should make clear to the sponsor is that it's going to be okay for them to change their mind, because normally that's an adversarial process. They don't think it's okay for them to change their mind, and so they become a bit demanding when they come and do it. But if you actually make clear to them that there's a level of discovery here and you're going to find new ideas as we go along, and you know what, some of them might be good, we don't want to miss out on them. So it's actually okay for you to change your mind. But also, sponsor, we're going to have a process to assess whether or not they're doable and what it means. So some of them we need to be able to get them to trust the process that says we're going to assess this, and you know what, if we can't do it, we're not going to kill the project. We're going to maybe put it off and look at a version 2, or we're going to come back and re-baseline the whole thing and start again. But sometimes that's a good decision to make. You'll find in our notes back on those slides that we've actually said that quite often people can't make that decision because they don't have the right advice. So it's so important to have internal experts provide advice on this. The real architects who should have looked at the Sampoon building.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Peter. Just one other question that it comes to me just from what you were talking about, Keith, is that, and I myself have been in projects where this has happened, where you do have this need to have a technology component that hasn't been considered, that it is part of common infrastructure, but no one sort of puts a hand up for ownership of it. I mean, how do you enable that within the project, and who funds it? Where does it come from? Because that's, from the project's perspective, one of the biggest challenges is that, there's this extra cost. So how do we do this?
Yeah, been caught with that one a number of times, and my natural reaction is go to the organisation, and it might even be just go straight to the top, saying that, hey, this platform does have value across the entire organisation, but we've been asked to slip it in as somehow make it happen in the project context, and articulate the issue, Miranda, saying, hey, if we do this, it's going to be boxed. It's really only going to be embedded in the context of this project. You're not going to get the benefit. So, and the other thing is, just as we warned in our issues, that this has not been costed properly, has not been factored in terms of an enterprise implementation. So when we start hearing from, no particular order here, but the enterprise architecture team, security, other applications, other ones that have been vying for this product or a solution for a number of years, and now suddenly it's popped up in this project, it really needs to be almost created as its own brief, and then that own brief has its own life, and and push for that, and then push that back up into the organization to say, hey, this has to be addressed differently. Otherwise, it will become a tactical decision at the project level, which I don't think anyone really wants.
I've got to say, when you get to that point, and everything Keith said, I agree with. When you get to that point, this is a failure of strategic planning, because you've got a project that's going to have to wait for that to happen. So it's going to have to be replanned as well, because you may have to change the project strategy to work on something else while you're actually waiting for it to happen. Not the fault of the project team. This is the organisation, something that the organisation should have picked up during their strategic planning process. Will I continue?
I'm just checking if there's any questions from the participants just before we move on. No. Okay, so
I'm dying to look at the chat, but I can't fit it all on my screen. But thanks so much.
How are we going time wise? By the way, I think we're at half
we're probably
hour.
Okay. I think we're okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So issue number 6, Peter.
Let's get stuck into it. So this is one that I feel there's a few issues coming up here that are emerging. They're emerging because we just need to run projects slightly differently in 2021 to how we did them maybe 10 years ago, even 15 years ago. So today we've got key functions in the organisation that really have to work hand in hand to support projects, and it's more important than ever before they do. We think there's 5 of them, right? So we think there's finance, procurement, program office, change management, and enterprise architecture. And you can't live without these all working right in your project. And let me walk you through some of the issues here. So the first issue I see, and I'll go through some of the red ones here because they're just killers, is I find that a lot of organisations have inadequate architectural support for projects, right? So there's an architecture team, 2 or 3 people, they're running 10 projects, there's no way they can support them. And perhaps they don't know what sort of support they should be providing either. They may not have the right embedded processes in there. If that's not working properly, that's a big risk to projects, particularly if they're doing things that are innovative. The other problems around finance and procurement. Finance have set up most of their governance processes around controlling capital. But what we have today is consumption-based IT. And so is the finance team in your organisation, do they have their head around that? Do they have processes that support those projects? And can they help you manage where things are falling over the cliff into shadow IT? The other side is that procurement often doesn't have mechanisms to allow for sandboxing. They see most things as a major purchase where I might need to buy a single user license for 5 or 6 products just to test them out to see how they work. I need to reverse engineer them, and quite often there's no procurement process for that. I've got to do that behind their back. And then we get to change management where those people are hired and fired on a project by project basis, and this really drives me nuts. We have to get organisations to understand they run projects all the time. I don't understand why they would go out and sack all of the key people in a project when a project ends. There's going to be another one tomorrow. So organisations seem to think that projects are a one-off exercise. And let me look at the architecture team. Here's a list of how architecture teams can support a project. It's not even complete. I just want to put it there to show you how many things they should be involved in. And why are some of them red? The ones that are red happen before the project team even exists. So if you don't have an architecture team involved in this, all of those red ones didn't happen before the project team actually were put in place. So Keith, what do we do about this?
Look, it's certainly the right question, Peter. I mean, getting back to your essential five, and I love that term. And it's you'll have the slides along with the recording, so you can go back to that when the time's right, everyone. But finance and procurement need to understand, well, both understand and have the vehicles in place to account for SaaS and consumption models. It's just fairly early days for a lot of finance and procurement functions. Need to strongly advocate that support for the essential five, especially empowering and enforcing that they comply with the mission of project success. They don't just throw rocks. They don't just stay outside the tent and say what they've done's enough. Organizations are in fact always delivering projects. I mean, when isn't it happening, to your point? Why deploy untested resources when you can have this in-house? At the same time, architecture is very important to success and should be appropriately resourced. But at the same time, they have a responsibility to proactively drive and support that business case and the projects. So all good points, Peter. And with that, let's go on to 7, where SaaS is the new paradigm. So a simple question for everybody, in understanding the SaaS world and the opportunity there, why wouldn't you leverage SaaS whenever possible? It's increasing and improving every day, and they are competing to provide the best features for your organization. Your uniqueness doesn't come from the solution itself, but it's how you assemble these services and combine them, the necessary SaaS solutions to make it work for you. Now, you'd argue with that being the case, well, what could possibly go wrong? Okay. This also brings a new suite of challenges, concerns, and disciplines. But if you get it right, you're probably on a winner. And with that, let's have a look at some of the issues. Now, along with the disruptive benefits of SaaS comes a significant responsibility and change in deployment. Okay, SaaS providers need to align with your business direction enough to grow feature sets, to work with you in a co-innovative way, and essentially stay aligned to what your needs are over the life cycle of your SaaS investment. From a hygiene perspective, security, availability, and performance must align to your requirements. You have this danger of creating considerable tech debt if you don't consider your own service boundaries and/or APIs. And of course, the question of who chooses, what decision-making process, who pays, how to implement, all factor into consumption-based services. The following opportunity here, or if you like, following mashup, now illustrates the opportunity and how it can be realized as SaaS. Here's a situation where we're able to integrate 3 platforms to deliver a quick and a significant benefit. It saved hours in meeting productivity, and it automatically positively enforced the process of change. And bringing together a voice to text, a Teams, which just about everybody has, and then a SaaS-based CRM, disrupted the way that the Salesforce did business, and certainly the automation there within. So, from your perspective, Peter, what's your thoughts on this?
They're pretty simple, mate, really. The first thing is SaaS provides huge opportunities. So we just need people to start taking advantage of it. And in the next couple of slides, we'll start to talk about why they're not. But before you actually do it, we need to make sure that we've got the right common infrastructure in place. That's generally the reason people don't do it. If I don't have a middleware platform in place, SaaS is not that easy to compose together. One of the things I say to all of our clients is that you need a dedicated capability to go look for new candidate services in SaaS. Now, why would I say this? Well, I've actually got a little test that I do for organisations when I get their business and technical people and architects together. And that is, I say, get out a pencil and paper and write down the name of 5 SaaS products you could use. And most people really struggle to get 5. There's 100,000 out there that are commercially viable, and no one knows any more than 5. So unless we start to educate ourselves on what's there, there's no way we're ever going to pick them because we don't know what they are. We also need to be careful when we're choosing our as-a-service partners. Keith has touched on this, but I think there's a couple of levels here that we look at. People just look at functionality. That's not enough. Security compliance needs to be considered. So does flexibility. Maybe they can't scale as much as you need them to. And the final one, and probably the most important, is their culture. I want to check them out. If they're not prepared to work with me and they go by the contract all the time, maybe they're not the right ones. So don't underestimate how hard it is to do, and do it for the right reasons. And if you do all of that, once again, this is the organisation that has to make these calls. These are not project team calls. Project team is going to take the options analysis from the business case and implement what they said. It's back then that they should have been saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a great option. We could go for SaaS. Yeah. If I look at what's a parallel issue with this, it's that we have the wrong skills. Over the last few years, contemporary projects really have required people with different skills mixes. And there are 2 issues here. One is, in most organisations, permanent staff have really fallen way behind the skills they need. And I'm not just talking about the project team, I'm talking about the whole business. And ones that are really, really bad at it, they've fallen so far behind, they don't even know what they need. So I use this example in a lot of the papers that I write. My grandfather, bless him, worked in Queensland Rail for 45 years. He worked on steam trains, and he would sit down with me and he told me everything about how they worked. He knew everything about them. He knew about how coal was used and how it made steam and where the water went and all of that stuff that you should know. But if we had to build a very fast train tomorrow, he's not the guy we'd get, because they need to know, to do that, I need to know about magnets and levitation and aerodynamics. It's not the same thing, and that's where projects have gone today. I'm not going to go through all of these because we're probably always being pushed for time with this talk, but we'll give you the slides and you can see them. I'm going to just touch on a couple. And they're both in the governance one. Organisations can be so poorly off resource-wise, they don't even know how to fix the problem. And the other thing they do is they leave projects with no spare capacity to provide experiential training. We want that project done at the cheapest cost possible. Well, not really. You want the project done so that we have a bit of capacity to take these experts that we've brought in and grow our team. There is one other one I have to touch on in technology. Failure to pursue premium resources as permanent hires. In the Queensland government, the government chief health officer is probably on around $700K a year. Doctors who work for the Queensland government are on that type of income. Lawyers who work for the Queensland government are on hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. They're on special contracts. But if we've got someone who wants to come and work for the government as an architect or a program director, we'll have to hire them as a contractor because there's no structure in the government to hire them as a permanent. And we just talked about the fact that we sack all of our permanents after every project. Sack all of our contractors, after every project. Recruitment questions come along and they just make no sense. And this is one of the things when I said organisations don't know how to fix this. I was actually asked recently when I was looking as a consulting role, I was interviewed in the final couple of people. I didn't get the job actually, so this probably is the reason why. They said to me, can you write HTML? Could you build a website? And I went, no. And then I go, next. They're not hiring me for that. They don't know what questions to ask. How do we fix this, Keith?
Yeah, look, it's I must say I've been reflecting on that while you were speaking there, Peter. I mean, there strikes me that there's two major, if you like, dimensions to this. One is the if you like, the organisation themselves. I mean, they're going to invest in the right sales director and the right sales resources. They're going to get the right operationalists, right? They're going to get the right people in place to do all that. Why wouldn't you be getting the right people in the technology and in the innovation areas as well? Right. So first you talk about intent. Then the next part of that is then the capability to identify and procure them. Right. So I think recognizing that new skill requirements is probably number one. And then having those capabilities to be able to select them in both terms of skills and team balance. I think this obviously transcends the project team, right? This is an organizational capability, which you well alluded to. If you don't have the goods, acknowledge it and seek short-term assistance to find the right people. You know, it could be recruiters, but you've mentioned horror stories in that space, and I've witnessed every side of that. Recommend finding the right experts. If you're running projects in innovation all the time, you need architecture, you need change, you need project leads. They've got to be proven in the business. They show up on a Tuesday and exit on a Saturday. No one's going to trust them. Okay, I want you to change your entire business, Peter, and I'm going to be bond by Saturday. But please do it, or I don't know, or I'll spank you or something. And that's supposed to warrant change in a business, as opposed to we've done this before, Miranda, and we can do this again. This is how we're going to make it happen. Buy in, trust, credibility, right? And of course, that ongoing commitment to build those competencies in-house, they are a strategic asset. And you see the difference in some organizations that have it and don't, and it's obvious. I think at this point, I'd like to just, I haven't run through the matrix at the bottom here, but I think there's a recurring pattern here, right? And we are highlighting the fact that project team really isn't responsible for much of this. They augment the delivery. They can in hero form make these things happen. They can take their best experiences and if you like, influence the organization with that best experience. I've been there. I've seen that. I've somewhat utilized that. But when you look at it from an organizational point of view, what a risk. What a risk when you've got the opportunity to get the right people in there and the right skills balance. So I think it's fair and square on the organisation to get that right. And with that in mind, let's move on to number 9, the project engagement skills. So the steering committee, which is under discussion in this point, is an essential component to success. Right? They represent the executive, customer, suppliers, sponsor, operational leads, and their mission is to govern the project to success. But here's a basic question for everybody that's had any exposure to steering: is are they all trained? Are they inducted on how to govern? Are they clear on their roles and responsibilities? And the more interesting and finer point of does every member actually contribute? And are they aligned to success? So with that, let's have a look at some of the issues. Whether it's a lack of understanding of governance responsibilities, a lack of confidence, a lack of ownership, all these things can come together to limit steering committee contribution. It's also important that team not only governs the project well, but they don't get snowed by the technology team, right? They need to understand all the key issues, especially in the technology domain, and they need to ensure that everyone is still held accountable in the same way as of every other portion of a project. Now, I don't think we need to provide an example. I would actually challenge most to find an example where it hasn't been the case, right? While key members and those with skin in the game will always contribute, and they're gold. There's always a varying level of limited contribution, and capability and ownership from the committee as a whole. What's your thoughts there, Peter?
Yeah, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but I've never been in a steering committee in my life where everyone knew what their job was. Never. And that almost guarantees they're suboptimal. They're not helping you. I think everyone in the steering committee needs to be trained, and that training should cover all of the governance roles for how projects work. Because the people who come along, the stakeholders, they're in line positions. They don't run projects. They don't get it, how it actually works. And they're not game to say, hey, I don't understand any of this, because they look like idiots. So I think you have to inflict training on them just to make them feel comfortable. Once again, it's not a project team responsibility. I want to go on to the what I think is a crucial problem in projects. Have you ever seen projects go along and they're green, 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 and all of a sudden they're red, and everyone goes, what went wrong there? That project was been green the whole time, and now it's gone red. Well, this happens because when we get to implementation, no one's actually thought about it. And quite often, implementation is a big and slow and expensive thing if you're going to do it right. And if we have a look at how engineering works, when people are building bridges don't hold themselves up when they're half built. You've got to build temporary structures around them that they throw away later that cost lots of money to hold a bridge up. And it's the same with implementation in a lot of cases. So my point here is that if you haven't worked out the implementation strategy and you haven't planned it in the business case and you haven't costed it in the business case, then you don't have a clue what the project's going to cost. You don't know, because when you get to the implementation, there's a big surprise in terms of how much things can cost. And this is one of those situations where we always go on to blame the project team for getting it wrong. It's not their fault. Again, this should have been done when we put the business case together. We should have been able to recognise that. I've got an example I'll share with you, and I've hidden the name of the people involved very well, I think. But this organisation bought a SaaS-based CRM. They made one mistake on the first day, and that they paid for all of the licenses, and then went for a year configuring the product without using it while still paying for the licenses. So that's probably a bad mistake to make initially. But when they had spent $10 million on it, on licenses and work on configuration, they then started to work out how they'd implement it. That was the first time they looked. They had to replace 13 systems, and no one could figure out how to do it. If I take this system out, it gets data from another one, and it provides data to another one. How am I going to fix that? What am I going to do? How are these temporary ones going to work? No one had costed any of that work. And so a year later, they're still paying license fees, another $6 million, and they hadn't figured out how to make the implementation work. Sometimes, if it's really, really difficult, you might decide not to do the project at all. I need to know that in the business case. That's the point of the business case. Leaving this till the end just doesn't work. Have you seen this before, mate?
I've seen it too much, Peter. That's all I can say. I think when it gets down to brass tacks, the implementation planning and strategy starts well before project and the project phases. Really is a business case element. It needs to be fossicked and understood. I mean, if you're going to do a big bang versus an incremental effort, I mean, that's going to affect the entire organisation, or certainly that operation. So they need to be involved exceptionally early. And of course, the assumptions need to be tested ongoing throughout the project. Same time, the project team needs to ensure that they own the operational transfer as well. So while the strategy is set, the project team will be responsible somewhat for the delivery of the data migration, with assistance from the ops teams, the operational leadership, clearly enterprise architecture, but they need to make sure that gets fully transitioned back to production and operations. And if this is aligned with the design authority in your organisation, and of course with the steering committee support, you've got a pretty good chance of getting there. Okay, so with that, let's get to the last point, which is number 11, which is micromanagement. So micromanagement spawned in a number of ways, but it's usually from past failures, lack of trust in the current teams, and or where the governance is if you like, not so functional. And what you'll end up with is a strong individual, might be the project leader or sponsor, that believes that they can muscle the project over the line. Now, that can have an outcome, but of course that has a number of issues associated with it. So if we look at it, it's an unfortunate thing, because obviously the person wants to bring it across the line, but there are many show-stopping issues associated with going this track. Simply with that loss of trust in the innovation space, it's simply innovation may just well stop or become unwelcome. Stakeholders may be excluded to gain and retain more control. Governance implementation can be compromised, and it could be short-circuited, especially short-circuiting the project processes, which are there obviously for a reason. And one of the worst ones is the bottlenecks occur with single points of decision making, right? So it must go through the one person, the person's making a ton of decisions, and that the rats and mice aren't well sorted. And of course, the last thing is, if you're an individual that is subject to ongoing micromanagement, you've got burnout concerns and probable turnover issues as well. And so with that, should be avoided at all costs. There's much better ways to address a project that's under stress than trying to march it across the line. What's your thoughts on this, Peter?
Yeah, this is how you make a project not work. I'm not going to go through all of these. My biggest piece of advice is just don't do it. It's the wrong thing to do. And what the bit that I love about this is that we've just spent 50 minutes explaining that a lot of projects are in trouble because their organisation is letting them down. And then we're going to take a leader from that organisation and tell the project how to work. Hello? That doesn't make any sense. Right, and it is culturally appalling to do this. My suggested alternative: trust the project team. In my experience, most people who come and get into these roles are pretty good at it. Rely on proven governance processes and bloody support them. And at that point, we've got to the end of this 11 reasons that organisations let projects down. And so far, the project hasn't been responsible for a single one of them. So if your organisation wants your projects to run well, it's the organisation's job to deal with these 11 things. Let me hand over to Miranda to wrap up, and maybe there's some more questions and things from the audience.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Keith. Some amazingly detailed content for us to take in. We do have a question from the participants. What was asked was, how does the project respond to impacts of new and emerging technologies such as AI, where an organisation lacks sufficient digital capability?
Yeah, do you want me to take that one, Peter, or do you want to?
Yeah, you love those, Keith.
Oh, I don't know what. Well, I'd say there's a few factors to this. Look, in an ideal world, the enterprise architecture team, a number of players, I would suggest right up to technology leadership, would be across it. AI is a really good example because it hasn't happened overnight. There's been a number of solutions that have weaved their way into industry, whether it's segmentation from a CRM or from a call center management point of view, whether it's maintenance prevention and preventative maintenance, and it's a prediction to fail, which some of us have had a lot of experience over the years with trains and various other factors, from some people like Satoshi on the line. So it's not new. I think the most important thing here is, when you look at it from a governance point of view, and certainly from an organizational point of view, ideally you've got something like a digital council, or certainly a steering organization that is looking at these longer term investments that should be considered, should be well socialized in the business, should be well understood within each specific operational discipline what it can mean to them. So sales as an example, it might be prediction of sale, therefore prioritize. It might be in the operations sense, this machine will fail in 6 months. So when it does, let's instead of that, let's take it down in 4 months and then get the maintenance cycle done that way. We're predicting shift patterns, so HR can change the world. Right? There's so many ways that you can learn without having to be affected. And then when if you're midstream in the project, you've got change management, but ideally this is looked at leading into the project. Otherwise, you'd sort of ask the question of how long the project's been running for to an extent. The other question would be, what view, what type of short, medium, long-term view you've had of these technologies and how you want to envelop them into your business cases. But that being said, if there's a business case that should be evaluated and considered, go back to options and consider the change. That's my best experience.
One of the things, I see that's your question, Michael. That's a great question. One of the things that we promote as a business is this isn't just a project thing, and it isn't just a technology thing, and it is around those 5 foundations. And so to be able to take on and innovate with new technologies, whether it's AI or anything else, you have to have capabilities across that honeycomb diagram that's on the screen. And that's where organisations fall over. Right? They'll beef up their architecture team. That's not enough. They'll beef up their project team. That's not enough, because the governance guys won't know how to deal with it. They'll look at their technology team and they'll try and beef that up, but they won't put the resources and the skills in the right place. We're talking about a new organisational model to be able to deal with these things. And for people who don't know, Michael's a university academic who's very, very brilliant at what he does, and he is very down to earth about how things should be run in organisations. He's very practical, and what I would suggest here is that the problem with the way we deal with these things is we say this is a project issue, and it's more than that. It's an organisational issue. So as I've been limble, that's how we engage with organisations, and that's why this talk, which is about don't blame the project team, really is saying, hello, the whole organisation's responsible for this, and most of you are failing appallingly at it at the organisational level, and then you're coming along and blaming the project team, who are probably pretty good at what they do, for outcomes that you're not getting. We need to change that, because there's a lot of project professionals on this call and out in the field who can't do any better job because their organisation's not set up properly. Over to you, Miranda. I think we're running out of time at a rapid rate.
We are. Thank you for that. So, exactly as Peter was just saying, one of the key takeaways that I get from today is that it's about your organisation's maturity across those 5 foundations. Your engagement, your awareness, your agility, your governance, and your implementation. That's actually going to determine your ability to successfully run projects, and that success is pretty much determined before the project even starts. Another thing in project methodologies, they give us a great framework to run the project, but doing them well doesn't necessitate success in that project. And that with all of these issues that we've talked about today, that determines success, none have been the responsibility of the project team. So with that, we would really like to thank you all for joining us and sharing your time with us today. These slides and a recording will be sent to you shortly. And if you would like to expand on anything that we have talked about here today, please book a call with us. We would love to talk with you further. Thank you.